Adam Crookes, MEPS International Market Analyst. Great to have you back on the Marketing Minutes podcast. How are you today?
Yeah, good, thank you. It's been a while, so glad to be back.
It has. We've had you on Speaking of Steel as well in the past, of course, and people that attended UK Metals Expo will have seen you there. We're drawing on your research and knowledge of the Nordic steel market today to give a bit of an oversight, as we do with all these Marketing Minutes episodes, drawing on research that was produced for our European Steel Review supplement, which, as we know, provides market commentaries, prices, price indices, and forecasts for that region.
Yep.
I guess there's quite a few trends to dwell on, I suppose, at the moment, Adam. A lot of external influences that we're aware of on the Nordic region's steel prices. But we'll go through in sections, and we'll take a look at supply first, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
As we're aware, you know, the state safeguards, anticipation of new EU safeguards is having an influence on the market, as is CBAM continually. But could you give us an overview, really, of the key factors affecting supply in the Nordic region's steel market?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, like you've just summed up there. I think really the main drivers is CBAM, with the exception, I guess, of Norway, as they have not entered the EU scheme and will be devising their own from January next year. So a little bit of an outlier there. And also, you know, the safeguard quota potential changes coming in July. Well, I say potential, I think they are definite now, but the numbers are yet to be confirmed. So that's driving somewhat tighter supply across the Nordic region, as we've seen in the rest of Europe, because there's less imports coming. You know, so European producers are taking advantage of that and pushing up prices where they can.
Okay, so I guess those factors must have influenced buy-in in a degree. We've seen in other parts of Europe that people have perhaps been forward buying to a degree, something that's not always reflected till the end of each research period in actual fact. But is that the case in the Nordic countries we cover?
Yeah, I think we've seen some examples of that. Some stockists have reported an increase in activity, I think particular in Sweden and perhaps Norway as well, and Denmark too. And that's perhaps given some people a bit of a positive spin on the situation, where I think underlying demand hasn't really changed in terms of consumption levels. But as I said, some stockists are quite pleased with the situation at the moment. But there is some apprehension that stock levels will now be relatively high, and then we could lead to a bit of a lull in activity as we lead up to the summer holidays in Europe.
Okay, and what's the supply picture in terms of talking about the different supply routes? We might see different trends in the European mills production in recent months compared to perhaps the material that's been offered by stockists and distributors.
Flat products, I do think there's reports of capacity available still. So mills are still offering fairly short lead times, in some cases still into July. So the reports of perhaps deals and negotiations being achieved to fill that capacity. Long products is a bit more mixed. I think there's been some reports of some longer lead times, particularly on plate and beams. Some even moving into September after the summer. So a mixed picture, but it reflects really the tightening of supply, really, because of the lesser imports into the EU. And I think mills are carefully sort of managing what they're offering in terms of capacity to the market because of the lower demand levels.
Okay. Well, we'll move on to onto the demand side of the Nordic picture at the moment.
Okay.
I think we've touched on that just ever so slightly there, but we're aware of some feedback from MEPS research partners that there is some positivity, particularly among respondents in Denmark and Sweden. I think that's perhaps a positive trait in those countries that that we benefit from hearing. They tend to keep the chins up, don't they? But
Yeah, perhaps so. Yeah, I think there is
how
some.
how is it sector by sector? Is there any areas where there is actual signs of positivity?
I think looking at sort of construction, I think across Denmark and Sweden and probably Finland as well, there's some good examples of, infrastructure projects from the governments there driving demand on long products. And I think there's also reports of data centers as well. As we've alluded to, I think in previous reports, the building of the data centers is keeping things ticking over because residential construction, I think across every country that we assess is really weak. There's been really no change in that. Perhaps a little bit of a seasonal improvement as was left the summer into spring. Um, but yeah, no one's really excited, let's say, on residential construction. I think it's still a market that's really struggling to recover. Um, the Nordic region is more perhaps green energy orientated, so I think there's more activity in that sort of market, more niche products is driving some demand. And as well, perhaps a sign of the times that defence work seems to be proving pretty good as well. And also, infrastructure building work tied to defence spending, so new buildings and things like that for defence is providing some good levels of work as well.
Okay, so in against that backdrop, what influence have we seen last month? And I guess that we're touching now on a little bit of research from this month in terms
Yeah.
of the price changes that we've seen.
Yeah, I think prices. So if we talk about flat products or coils, etc., I think we saw some quite big increases from March into April, and I think they've perhaps stabilized somewhat now, April into May. And I think that's due to people already buying. Stock levels have now gone quite high. People saw, market participants saw the prices increasing, and then we've had reports of that's driven some stocking activity. So now that's sort of come to an end somewhat, mills are looking to perhaps fill any gaps in capacity, and that's given a little bit of stability over prices, even though most have said to us they don't expect any real reductions before the summer holiday period. Um, Long products a little different in that we're seeing increases again this month into May. We're still finalising May's prices, but looking at the provisional numbers, we've seen a higher increase again April into May over compared to flats. And I think that's just a sign of the long products really catching up. They didn't increase earlier in the year or the back end of last year like other products did. And also perhaps because a lot of those are driven by EAF routes. We've seen a bit of the US-Iran conflict affect some of the energy prices and perhaps scrap and transport prices too.
Okay, so those cost pressures are creating issues, and I think we've seen in other parts of Europe that's going to have a knock-on effect to MEPS's forecast predictions for the coming months. In particular, it looks like the inflation outlook is looking slightly different, and that could really slow growth in various areas, couldn't it? Could you give us a little bit of a guide as to MEP's outlook for the coming months?
Yeah, I think the forecast over the summer period looked to be fairly stable. Looking at our forecast numbers, um, not a lot of movement. Maybe, over the summer period we might see a fluctuation here and there depending on um, how quiet the summer actually is, whether there's actually longer closures or things like that as we see generally every year. Um, but from September on, I think we expect to see the increases coming back again into the market due to cost pressures, like we've said, the continuation of um, the tighter imports and also CBAM as well. So no one expects the prices to soften really, speaking to the market anytime soon.
Okay, so those macroeconomic factors sort of join in with, I guess, those tightening imports, which might still provide some upward pressure to prices later in the year, providing there's demand there. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, I think so. And most are saying demand is not great, as we can all probably expect to hear, but most are saying it's stable, so similar levels to last year. I don't think anything's particularly got worse as such. It's just not improving in a way that people wanted it or expected it to. And as you alluded to, there's inflationary pressures. There's rumours that the ECB may even increase interest rates coming in the coming months. So it shows you the situation of the overall economic picture, and that also just stalls any confidence, I think, in major investments and large projects to be started.
Okay, well, thanks ever so much for that summary, Adam. I think the lesson, as ever with these marketing minutes podcast episodes, is that for a broader picture, for a bit more granular insight, you need to keep an eye on our steel market reviews. In this case, we were drawing on the European Steel Review supplement, which your research contributes to, Adam. So, yeah, I guess going forward, that would be the advice to people. But we'll leave it there for now. Thanks ever so much for joining me, Adam. Been really insightful.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks.